Hello, book lovers. This is Spines and Spoilers, and I am your host, Carrie Rogers. I'm not gonna dance around it. It's been a long time since I've made any videos. You can tell because I'm stuttering more. My stuff is still packed. I haven't found my camera stuff quite yet, but it's out there. I'll find it. One of the things that I'm reading right now is the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. It's the prequel to the other Hunger Games, the Hunger Games trilogy, basically, told from the perspective of President Snow, from what I've seen so far. It may spread out and go from the perspective of other characters. I don't know. I just started it. That is what I am reading right now. What I am drinking right now, if I cannot spill it, is some black chai tea. We're gonna get around to the whole reason that you actually clicked on this video, which is to discuss some books which I think are perfect to read during the Halloween season. Okay, so I moved so that I'm turned the other direction so that there's not this weird red glow on my face for some reason. So I'm gonna go ahead and let you know I'm going to be cheating a little bit throughout all this and doing kind of more than one per each number, because some authors just have more than one book that's really good. For the first one though, it's not just one author, it's just kind of a group. The first one is just the classics, you know, horror classics, Gothic classics, the stuff that you immediately think of basically when you think of books to read for Halloween. Now, while these are not by any means the only classics that are available, I put together a short list of ones that I really enjoy and ones that I think that people should probably check out. But I'm just going to start from the top and keep going and just kind of rattle them off. The first one is Bram Stoker's Dracula. The second is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Jack Finney. The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. Beloved by Toni Morrison, that's a really good one. The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, that's a really old one. There's also Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler, another one that's kind of a little more modern, but I still would consider a classic. Carmilla by Sharon Le Fanu. The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. That's another one by Shirley Jackson. I should have put that together. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which is more of a short story. And the last one is technically considered a romance, but I don't care. It is a Gothic romance and feels very, I don't know, autumnal to me. It's Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and that's just one of my favorite books of all time, and I can make an excuse to read it no matter what you say, so don't come at me. Number 2 is another kind of combination. It's Heart-Shaped Box and Nosferatu by Joe Hill. Nosferatu, I would say that it works for both Halloween and Christmas. Honestly, I probably would have put it more towards the Christmas side, but it's great for Halloween as well. It's an extremely interesting, unique book that I would definitely recommend looking into. It was unlike anything I had ever read at the time. Nosferatu is actually a show now as well, so if you wanted to add it to your Halloween watches, that would also work. The same can be said for Heart-Shaped Box, but it also kind of has sort of a classic horror type vibe to it, which is interesting. I think it's interesting that he can kind of blend those two things together. Heart-Shaped Box is about an ex-musician, basically. He used to be in a metal band, and he started collecting all of these macabre items and just like forming this collection, and his fan base kind of hooks him up with all of these interesting items, which honestly, goals. But one day, this person, he finds this person online who's trying to sell this item that's supposedly haunted, and he's like, yeah, gotta have that, gotta add that to my collection. And he assumes that it's a hoax, because, you know, that's what you would assume in that situation. It's just for the aura around it, basically, and the intrigue. But he buys it, shows up, and it turns out it actually is haunted. So that starts out this whole adventure. Now, I would say that number 2 mostly would be aimed towards adults, maybe older teenagers. Number 3, however, is more directed at like the middle grade. It's The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. It's got almost a fairy tale kind of aspect to it, like there's a witch. So just to give you kind of some of the basics, there's a tale of a witch in this book, which there is, but she's portrayed as this individual who steals babies to like eat them and steal their soul and all this jazz, like you do with witches and old stories. But she is actually trying to save babies and get them adopted and stuff like that. And in this one case, she accidentally gives one of the babies magic powers, and it kind of follows their story and shows how it affects their life. And it's kind of a wholesome story, but very, very relevant to Halloween, I would say. It definitely connects, but it would be good for like a middle grade audience. Number 4 is basically anything by Stephen King. I know you've heard of him. He's a master of horror. He's also a master of like building up an atmosphere. And I keep coming back to his books no matter what. But in particular, for Halloween, I would recommend The Shining or Pet Sematary. Like, go back to the classics. If you want something slightly newer, though, like a zombie story, then Cell. Cell is a pretty good one. It's not his best work, but it is also very atmospheric and fitting for the holiday. Number 5 is another cheat. It's The Graveyard Book or Coraline by Neil Gaiman. He also has other very atmospheric books, but these two are more for like a middle grade audience. As far as his adult stuff goes, though, you can't go wrong with American Gods. It is also very dark. Anansi Boys doesn't quite fit the mood, but you could probably wiggle it in there somewhere. He also has a lot of short stories that are worth looking into, but we're not talking about that right now. The Graveyard Book is a really wholesome book. It's so sweet. I love reading it every year around Halloween. It's about a boy who ends up living in a graveyard because his parents are murdered. I know that doesn't sound wholesome necessarily, but he's raised by ghosts, and they basically teach him, and it's such a sweet story. It might make you cry at the end, I don't know, but it's definitely worth checking out, even if you're an adult. I don't care. It's so sweet. Now, Coraline, I'm sure you've heard of. It is meant for children, or like middle grade children, but honestly, it's creepy as hell, and there's a movie that goes along with it, but I feel like the book is slightly creeper. If you are not familiar with it somehow, the story is basically there is a little girl named Coraline. She is dissatisfied with her life. She thinks that it is very boring and bland. And then she discovers this door that leads to another world and a seemingly better family, but you find out over time that that's not the case, that there's a lot of shady shit going down. The next book on my list is City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. Um, it's an interesting take. It reminds me slightly of Danny Phantom mixed with Odd Thomas, but more atmospheric somehow. If you don't know what either of those entities are, though, it's okay. So basically, her parents are ghost hunters and move her to this really haunted area of Edinburgh. Um, excuse me. And the main character ends up almost drowning, and it gives her powers to talk to ghosts. That being said, this sounds very dark in premise, but it's honestly kind of a wholesome, whimsical book in a way that you would not expect, like the Graveyard Book. Not quite that young. It doesn't read quite that young, but it is one that I would definitely recommend looking into. It's very quick. It flows nicely, and it's very atmospheric. Number 7 is another combination. It's Phantoms or Odd Thomas by Dean Koontz. Yeah, Phantoms and Odd Thomas, they're two very different books. Both deal with the supernatural. Phantoms is basically about a town where everyone ends up going missing, kind of. And some people kind of go looking for the individuals who've gone missing and end up discovering that there's something bigger going on. There are a lot of ties to like H.P. Lovecraft's works, interestingly enough. Odd Thomas, however, is delightful. It's got a lot of dark elements to it, I'm not gonna lie, but it is about a boy named Odd Thomas who is able to see ghosts. They cannot speak with him, but they can gesture and they can show him things, and he can speak to them. But yeah, it's an interesting book. He kind of figures out that something's going on in the spiritual world, and it's a series of books, so he's always working to solve a problem or crime or something like that, and is using ghosts to do so. It is surprisingly wholesome at points, especially in the first one. Just be ready to get your heart broken. Speaking of breaking your heart, this one is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It is so depressing, but it's so dark. So if you want to go like dark for your Halloween reading, this would be where to go. It's so sad and so depressing, but it's so good. It hurts so good. It is based in a dystopian world that is basically like people dealing with society burning to the ground, and humanity has resorted to like its basest instincts and stuff like that. There are pillagers and rapists all around, and it follows this father and his son and details how they are surviving in all of this. And pretty much the entire book is dialogue based, so I would recommend listening to the audiobook over reading it, like the physical copy. That is how I originally consumed it, and then I got the physical book and was very confused by how it was written. If you feel like you can get through this book emotionally, and if you can't, then I don't blame you. I didn't realize how much it was going to hurt me when I read it. So, good luck and may the odds be ever in your favor, friend. Number 9 is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. But honestly, any of his work would suffice for this list. He does a lot of kind of modern horror books. With My Best Friend's Exorcism, I get very much a Jennifer's Body vibe. This girl and her best friend, they go out for a swim with their friends. The best friend goes missing for quite a long time and then finally shows back up, and she's acting completely different, and just gets steadily stranger and stranger until the main character figures out that she is possessed. And I will leave it there with you. It's a very good book with some dark elements, but I wouldn't say that it necessarily takes itself as seriously as Jennifer's Body. Number 10 might elicit a bit of a groan from you, and I don't know if you would consider this a cheat or not, because I guess it is technically a classic, but it's also kind of a category unto itself. Um, and this is just Edgar Allan Poe. Like, in particular, his short stories. You probably had to cover his stuff in the past, but his stuff is short enough that you can reread it, and it kind of hits the same. Absolutely recommend it for Halloween in particular, or just if you feel like reading something spoopy. The next book on my list, let me get it open, is Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. It is kind of a modern spin on a classic horror story. It reminds me a little bit of Rebecca. Basically, her sister sends, the main character's sister sends her a note, and she comes to her mansion to investigate what's going on, and discovers her husband, and there's just like a lot of things going on. I'm being very vague, but it's a very slow burn type of novel, but it's extremely enjoyable once you actually get the ball rolling. So not 11, 12 is Jurassic Park and the Lost World by Michael Crichton. The movies for these two are a little hit and miss. Jurassic Park was pretty close. There were some discrepancies, I'm not going to lie, but it was fairly close. Lost World, however, there were many more discrepancies. Both are worth reading, however, so that you can compare them. The premise is basically that an individual found the DNA of dinosaurs and cloned them and put them into a park, like an amusement park. And big surprise, excuse me, things start going wrong. Imagine that. But yeah, I don't know if other people would necessarily consider it in that vein, but I would think that would count as horror. I mean, if I had a T-Rex coming after me, or a Spinosaurus, or just any of the other guys, I would be terrified. Number 13 is the first nonfiction entry on this list. It's by one of my favorite authors. It's From Here to Eternity by Caitlyn Dodie. The premise is basically she goes around the world exploring the different funeral practices and death celebrations of other cultures. Totally recommend it, not even just for Halloween, though it is very creepy. Wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you have a weak stomach, but it's extremely interesting and definitely goes with the whole vibe. Number 14 is another one of my favorite books at this point. It's Scythed by Neil Schusterman. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But the premise here is basically it is a dystopian world where everyone can basically heal themselves. Like, technology is to the point where you can heal yourself from anything, almost anything. It takes a lot to die. So there are individuals who have been assigned the job of going around and killing people on their assigned day. It's a very isolating job, and like they get people kissing up to them at the same time to try and buy more time. But they have a very strict rules, and basically things get a little discombobulated. And people end up outside of the system. It's just a whole ride. It's a 3-book trilogy, I believe. I don't think there are any other books than that. Would definitely recommend. But the first book in particular is it fits the vibe, I think, of Halloween. Number 15 is the second nonfiction entry on this list. It's I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, I think. Don't know how to pronounce the name. She is Patton Oswalt's wife, which is interesting, but she is extremely talented on her own. The book is basically the search for the Golden State serial killer. She was basically trying to solve the mystery of who it is. But it is entirely nonfiction. It's semi-autobiographical, and it ended up leading to them catching the Golden State serial killer, which is absolutely fascinating. It had a huge impact on the world, on Patton Oswalt, and on this group of people who um, were also looking into the disappearances that circulated around this serial killer. And she even connected to the former victims who were still alive from the Golden Gate serial killer. Extremely interesting read. There was also a documentary made on it. Also recommend. Absolutely. Number 16 is kind of self-explanatory. It's Goosebumps by Rl Stein. I know they're technically like children and middle grade books. I don't care. I don't give a single damn. If you read them as an adult, they are so silly and funny and atmospheric, and even still vaguely creepy. He just does such a wonderful job, and I totally see why I was so obsessed with the books when I was younger. Also, probably part of why I ended up really loving horror and morbid shit. Goosebumps or Fear Street. Either one, honestly, they're both by R.L. Stein. Totally recommend either one. If you have somehow lived this long without reading them, please do. Don't try to take it seriously. They're so fucking silly and just delightful. Just chef's kiss. Number 17 is one of my all-time favorite books. I know I've said that like 3 now, but it is in like my top 10 favorite books. That's The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. There is a circus which randomly appears and disappears. Cool premise already. And then there are 2 huge magicians who are basically training these pupils and creating this competition. And it just spans ages and ages. And the issue is that these 2 pupils end up falling in love with one another. So it's a very atmospheric book. I know I've used that word a lot, but it's very atmospheric, slightly creepy, very competitive, interesting all the way through. It's one of those books that doesn't translate very well into a summary, basically, but it is worth reading. The next one, number 18, is another mixture. It's The Lost Gods, or honestly anything by Braum. The main reason to read his books, I think, is his illustrations. He does his own writing and his own illustrations, and the writing is good. I love the writing. It's very creepy, very atmospheric. There's that word again. But the illustrations are just like otherworldly. And The Lost Gods is basically about a dad. Okay, this one I'm just pulling from my brain. I'm trying to remember. It's about a dad whose child gets dragged down into hell, I believe is the premise. And he ends up having to go into hell and try to find his child. It's more just like the underworld. If you read it, then you will see. And you will also see the illustrations. So yeah, would recommend. He's also got The Child Thief, which is like a dark retelling of Peter Pan. Love it. There's Krampus, which you know what Krampus is. Just picture that. There's one called The Plucker that I haven't read, but I'd love to, and it seems like it's along the same vein. We're getting really close to the end. Number 19 is Blood-Sucking Fiends by Christopher Moore. If you haven't read Christopher Moore's work, I would recommend it. A lot of his stuff is just really funny. Blood-Sucking Fiends is, I think, a trilogy. It's at least a duology. I haven't read the third one if it exists. But yeah, it's just about a modern-day woman who ends up getting turned into a vampire and how she finds it, or how she handles it, rather. Words. Why cannot word? It's an interesting take on it. It's a comedy, basically. It's one of his earlier books, so it's not as comedic as some of the more modern ones, which, you know, are like laugh out loud funny. And this one's just like you have a smile on your face the entire time and kind of chuckle. But yeah, very much fits the vibe of Halloween. Alrighty, well, we're real close to the end. Number 20. I'm not gonna lie, it might make you mad. It's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. By Alvin Schwartz, that's his name. If you haven't read these, would definitely recommend. There are 3 different books, and there's just a series of short stories, and they're just perfect for Halloween. They're the types of things that you would, you know, tell as a kid with the covers pulled up over your head with the flashlight on your face. That's exactly what I did with my sister and some of our friends. And it was so great. I would always look for them in the library. They're not very big. They're about that big. But there are several short stories, and each tale is some kind of creepy. And there are also illustrations that come with this one, and I feel like some of these illustrations probably were not appropriate for this age range. If you can only read one thing and you want to find something to put you in like that mindset, and you're not looking for something wholesome, because this is not wholesome, let me tell you, then yeah, I would recommend this. I would definitely say look into this one. I genuinely don't remember what my outro was, so thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you had a good time, hope you enjoyed it. If not, I'm sorry, just unsubscribe, go on your way. But thank you for watching. I hope that you're all doing all right out there and that you're having a good day. Please treat yourself well. Just remember to like, share, and subscribe, and love yourself. That's what it is. Most importantly, love yourself. Do it. Bye.